Welcome to the Caffeine Stream on Caffeine and Philosophy.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Caffeine Stream. I am CB Robertson. This is episode 9, and we're here with another special guest, Jonas Weaver, to talk about music and about a particular German band that we've both come to enjoy tremendously, which is Rammstein. Jonas has a little bit more training and knowledge in this field. Actually, Jonas, would you mind introducing yourself? Who are you? What do you do?
Hey, I'm Jonas. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate in German studies. I'm writing a dissertation on anxiety in post-war West German literature, and I have some other tertiary kind of and secondary interests in like critical theory, nationalism, pop culture, and a weird side project and passion for filth and degeneracy as it relates to expressions in culture, in cultural expression.
So translated, both of us, I think, reject credentialism, but in terms of pure credentials, you could not find a more qualified person to be talking about Rammstein with the blend of nationalism, Germany, filth, culture, and art for art's sake.
You probably could, but they're probably not coming on your podcast.
Probably not. Yes. I don't think I've reached the stage of controversy that Rammstein themselves have reached, though. So I feel in good company on that regard. It's funny. I remember listening to Martin Amis, the English writer, describing good etiquette in writing, and he says, for a writer, etiquette has nothing to do with good manners. No writer or artist worth a damn cares about, respecting the feelings or opinions. He said for him, the good artist etiquette is integrity and congruency with the form, of matching the form with the content. And Rammstein certainly offends a lot of people with the lyrics and the imagery they employ, particularly in the song that really got me back into their stuff, which came out quite recently, Deutschland. Extremely controversial, at least in its music video form. But I mean, it seems like all great art seems to do that. I know the Iliad, my own favorite, opens with Menin Aedetheia, and menace was a taboo word. You weren't supposed to say that because it might invoke the disastrous wrath of heaven that it implies. One gets the sense of an almost superstitious aversion to some of the things that Rammstein brings into their music.
Oh, entirely. Well, and most famously, they got controversy a couple times. Probably the two most famous ones are from 1995 and 1999, and then you said 2019. The 1995 one was their first album, and the cover is like them all shirtless and looking sexy, and their chests are bared, and everyone was like, well, that looks like this Nazi moment of strength through joy, and kind of this.
It seems like a reach.
It's a little bit of a reach, and but that wasn't really the main controversy. The main controversy came in 1998-99 when they did a cover of Depeche Mode's Stripped, and decided in the music video to include scenes from Leni Riefenstahl's 1936 movie Olympia, which is about the 1936.
Yeah, anything Leni Riefenstahl is going to be a little edgy.
It didn't go over too well. And so add in the fact that Till Lindemann has these rolling R's. The way he sings is a kind of a strange combination of what has been sort of an experimental form from the mid-20th century, this thing called Sprachgesang. So it's not quite singing, not quite speaking. His rolling R's, his baritone, and then you add kind of their general aesthetic.
Their vibe has a kind of almost not to brand them unfairly, but it has an almost kind of fascist vibe.
It's a very militant vibe.
Yeah.
And
which incorporates both the filth and the like Goethe references and all that,
Oh,
the
100%.
blend of the two.
And they went from Germany. They went from like the main controversy in the Anglophone world, I'd say, is probably just because they got really horny on stage. And in the Anglophone world, there's a lot more taboos about violence in Germany than there are about sex, and that flips entirely especially in the US. And so we weren't. I remember watching a documentary, and they were saying that in their first show in New York City, band members took these like long fluorescent bulbs and just broke them over each other's backs and stuff, and were bleeding. No one was offended by that. The offense came when they got bigger, and they decided to have a giant penis that Till rides around and shoots white foam out of. That is where the offense comes.
Of course.
So it is kind of a cultural level of like what is offensive in what cultural context.
In my brief experience in a German airport, that seems like just another Tuesday in Germany.
Yeah. No, it's Germany is. So just as a quick example, the current controversy musically in Germany is this shitty pop song that they play at beach parties in Mallorca called Lila. It's banned at German festivals, even though DJs are playing it in protest, because the chorus is about these two dudes go into a town. They meet this guy, and the guy is like, I have a brothel. My brothel mother's name is Lila. She's young, pretty, and hornier than all the rest. And in Germany, they're claiming it's sexist, but if you go to any German town, there's brothels. And just so it's kind of an odd cultural shift. And Rammstein, like you said, with Deutschland was probably the newer controversy. The video was controversial. Some of the lyrics were kind of controversial. And yet they're really still popular among people.
Well, I mean, my impression, I've been to Germany a few times, but my cultural familiarity with the sort of spirit of the nation at the moment and its language is more lacking. But my impression from sort of an outsider's view is that they're living under this kind of constant feeling of guilt, and that they're like just incessantly trying to overcome. And what's weird is they're increasingly not alone in that. We're seeing it in America too. And it's very interesting watching artists try to finesse that. I mean, my impression of Rammstein's work is they're certainly not a right-wing band by any stretch of the imagination. They're, if anything, more fairly center to even a little bit beyond center left. Although Till has some traditionalist leanings from an aesthetic level, but beyond that, politically, they're very much not right wing. But they seem to finesse that with an artistic kind of care that you see other bands and other music groups from other countries, at least for the moment, don't seem to have to. There was one of my other favorite, pardon the phrase, but Volkish bands, The Who from Mongolia, got in not even that much hot water, but like for a couple days got into a little bit of hot water because their music video for the Wolf Totem included a Mongolian biker gang, and one of the band members, one of the gang members in this band had a ring with a swastika on it, and the camera zoomed in close up on that swastika. And it's funny because when you watch the music video, it's blurred out now, but it wasn't originally. And you can actually pause it at a moment, even now, and still see the swastika in the moment before it gets blurred out. Like, obviously that has a much different meaning in Mongolia than in Western Europe. Yeah. But they still had to be like, okay, fine. Well, for the sake of our Western audience's sensitivities, we'll blur that out. But I mean, they could get away with it, and did get away with it, and still have top selling songs. And it feels as if German musicians and artists who wanted to talk about anything, substantive beyond just pop songs about the guy I met at the bar or whatever, have to walk a very fine line.
Yeah, I would say generally a fine line. It's either a sort of tragic melancholy if it's dealing with the past, or it's a very just straightforward kind of anti-fascist punk kind of aesthetic. There's a lot of really great punk and kind of punk adjacent rock in the last like 40 years from Germany, but a lot of it is very like punk in the wet, like in the US and in the UK aesthetic to it, a very clear political posture.
Right.
And Rammstein, I think you're right, is that they're not on the right at all. I would even go further and say it's not so much that they're on the right or that even Till that has these traditionalist leanings. He's very regionalist.
Interesting.
And so he has no loyal. And so when you talk about the German past, it's kind of interesting to think after the Second World War, once you realize that from the end of the Second World War, literally within a few months functionally, and within 4 to 5 years later, there were two whole separate nations. So it wasn't one unified nation. And so they're all of Rammstein are East Germans.
Right.
And so their past is extremely different from the West German. And so what they are mourning, and you see this actually in Till's solo project, which we can get into later much more, is that he misses something about that. Like there's a lack and a loss that you can see in his aesthetic.
Now, did that how far back? My German history here is abysmal, which is unfortunately given the time I've spent over there. How far back does the the cultural divide between East and West Germany go? Is that was that back in an Otto von Bismarck Prussian days kind of thing, or is it much more recent than that?
I would link it mostly to, so there were divides up to World War One, but World War One shattered a lot of long divides, I think, in Europe generally. And then you have Weimar, and you have this moment of like cultural, I guess what we are, if you go, you're online, all the memes are what, like Weimar, post Weimar, or whatever.
Right.
Cultural degeneracy or cultural liberation, depending on which side of the perspective you take. And then you have the Second World War, which further destroyed huge chunks of European culture and life. The East and West is distinctly post World War II, though.
Okay.
There are some probably like long-lasting religious differences or regional differences, but a lot of the general differences, economic sense of kind of bitterness or attitude, are post World War II with kind of
so his regionalism is not ideological but personal then, because it's within his lifetime and his experience of Germany and of life.
I would say it's less ideological than not. However, I think if you want to understand like why they have a song like Links 2, 3, 4 after they did their cover of Depeche Mode, you have to understand that like they clearly want to put themselves on the left. They state that explicitly, which is not a surprise if you grew up in the East German context where the attitude was, we beat fascism, we conquered fascism, it's gone, we destroyed it.
So it's almost, being on the left is almost an aspect of regional identity then.
Yeah, it's tied to kind of, he grew up in a East German area. He still has affection for East Germany.
In the same way an Irishman might strongly identify as Catholic, not as a matter of belief, but as a matter of nationality.
Yeah, I think there's probably a stronger argument to make that they identify as left or mourn a certain loss of the past or have a conflicting relationship to the past precisely because they grew up in a divided nation. There was no unified nation.
It's a funny self-identification. I've been trying out this and trying to develop this theory of the left and right, because the way that people talk about left and right is so low resolution. Usually, even when people talk about it in terms of the French Revolution, it has always to do with attachment to certain policies, and you can always point to moments in the past where this or that party was completely inverted on a particular policy. Mm-hmm. And I feel like left and right politically has more to do with a time orientation. Like the left subscribes to the myth of utopia, where the best time is yet to come and in the future. And you see this reflected in the anarchic punk music. I was talking with another friend, Ben Brower, about the origins of the anarcho-primitivist movement in America from the anarcho-punk scene. Like the music came first, and then they found philosophers afterwards to support the position. But the right in every manifestation we see seems to be past mind oriented. It seems to be subscribing to the myth of the golden age as opposed to utopia, where the best time is in the past. The best time there was
the past where we lost something, and
right,
we can recuperate it.
And the best we can do is to try to retain what's still left of that legacy. And like that's the path towards the good life, is retaining the good from the past rather than tearing down the attachments from the past so that the better future can fill in the void. But we have to destroy the past first, which is kind of the left attitude. We need to make room for what's even better than the whatever good we might have now. We have the technology, as it were. And so the idea of nostalgia for a regional identity and a time in the past and a left-wing association with that seems almost contradictory.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because actually, if you look at, there's some stuff that's been in our Rammstein, but it's not just about Rammstein. It's also about East German literature and cultural stuff in general. But if you look in the scholarship, there's this term, this neologism, nostalgie. So it's nostalgia for the East.
Huh.
And it's like, instead of nostalgie, it's ostalgie. And it's kind of an interesting kind of like neologism that has been developed that talks about how writers and cultural creators from the East German period have this sense of something lost. Which is sort of understandable if you grew up in a milieu and a context for years of your life, that's what you knew. You didn't know any different, and then it disappears, and all of the structures. It's almost a weird moment of like Nietzschean destruction, where all the values and norms of your life are gone overnight, and now you have to make do in this new set of values that have been imposed.
Yeah. And the sense of nostalgia I get from many of these people is almost, it's not even judgmental. The nostalgia seems to have little to, in some cases, zero bearing on belief in the superiority of it. You see people feeling nostalgia. I've met people in my time in trades, and especially in truck driving, who grew up in horrible neighborhoods, just absolutely terrible urban hellholes, for lack of a better term. And they eventually move away, and they move to some other nicer part of the country. And it doesn't stop them from feeling a kind of nostalgia for their the neighborhood they grew up in, however terrible it might have been. It's a very interesting phenomena.
Yeah. And I guess for me with Rammstein, when I think about it, it's like, even in the song Deutschland, it's the one lyric that's interesting for me is that it's like, where is the lyric? I just have it pulled up on my other monitor because I needed to have it. So jung und doch so alt. And so it's like, there's almost this layering here where you could actually argue
that, young and so old.
Yeah. And so like, Germany as a nation prior to the wars did not exist until like 1871, 1872. Gets shattered after World War II, and then you have two new nations that literally had their own quite literally were separate nations. Then they get reunited. And so in 1989, you have almost a new nation being formed.
Mm-hmm.
And this new, so you already had, because the West German stuff after World War II was, how do we create a liberal democratic future? The East German thing is, we beat the fascists, fuck them. They're gone. We're going to build a socialist utopia. And then that all goes to shit. And then it comes together like, how do we bring the socialist utopians into the liberal democratic neoliberal order? And that's only 1989. That's not far in the past at all. So you have almost this young nation that's still refinding itself after having spent almost over half a century broken.
It's history. There's a great German word for, I feel like, what's happening. I've been, going through James Lindsay's stuff on Hegel a lot. He keeps talking about this word aufheben, which is to sublimate. It's to abolish and yet destroy. And I feel like that's what, or is to keep and yet abolish at the same time. And I feel like that Germany has very much done that with itself, with its own history. It has internalized it and yet destroyed it at the same time in a strange way.
Oh yeah, 100%. There are in terms of memory, couple of the controversial things in recent years have been, I think at the early 2000s, there was a debate about the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin. And if you go, it is a couple, like probably about a block worth of just stones of varying heights. And it kind of sinks into the ground. And to this day, it's a controversy. The Alternative for Germany has a politician who described it as Germany's the only city with a memorial to its shame. So you don't have any of these, like Hitler's bunker where he killed himself has been paved over. There's no marker. Like you can find where it is because plenty of people have an interest in finding where he shot himself. But there's no memory of that. Or if you go to Nuremberg, you can go, and I've been to that. There's party grounds. So the building is still there. The symbols are all gone. So it's this weird balance of, we've erased all the symbology.
Yeah.
But we're keeping things.
I've been to Nuremberg, but I was too young to know the context of what I was
drunk at the brothels for most of it, so it wasn't great.
How very Till Lindemann-esque of you. Exactly. He would be proud. It's very it's a very ghostly kind of thing to go through there and see history there yet not there at the same time. And it would be one thing. I mean, like, cities change and buildings get demolished, new ones get built. That's one thing. It's another to have it so self-consciously, like, half deleted but half preserved in shame in that way.
Even more telling, actually, is the other little thing. And all over Germany, and you might have seen these, are these little gold stones, Stolpersteine, so little stumbling stones. And they're in front of all these houses where Jewish families were taken out of and sent away. And it's memorializing it. And so you literally have on streets little gold stones all over.
Mm.
And so, like you said, it's this weird tension of, we've erased the past, but we're going to set literal physical material reminders all over the street.
It's a kind of contradiction that, to Rammstein's credit, as an artist, they seem to not just embody, but to express very well. And it's one of the things that gives a sense and a feeling of depth to their music. And my favorite contrast with them is not even the political stuff, but the mixture of, deep, like Till Lindemann reads like classical poetry and literature.
Yeah, and he writes his own poetry and everything.
Yeah. And at the same time, he has a song called Big Tits.
And a song that says literally on the same album, No Condom.
Right. It's this hilarious blend of just, as you say, filth and like intellectual seriousness and depth. I am, to my shame, not extremely familiar with Goethe. I've heard literally nothing but good things about him. My wife and I have been reading the who's the author of the Waldendorf School?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I met gosh, I don't know. I know who you're talking about. I met a woman who's big in the Austrian far right. I had coffee with her and her husband, who's an old Maoist. Um, and she's involved in a huge she got involved in a whole controversy, but I know who you're talking about. I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but yeah.
Rudolf Steiner. There we go.
Yeah, Steiner. Yeah.
Rudolf Steiner, who was himself deeply influenced by Goethe, who is for those of you who aren't aware, a romantic thinker and writer and artist, romantic in the philosophical sense. These are people who were extremely intelligent, but distrusted the faith in reason that we saw in the Enlightenment. Basically, they weren't anti-Enlightenment in the sense that you might see in someone like Hamann or Joseph de Maistre or people like that, but they were very very much a counterforce to the Enlightenment. And you saw it also in, interestingly enough, the Inklings from Britain.
Oh, yeah.
J.R. Tolkien was sort of a descendant of that romantic tradition in many ways. But Goethe was arguably the greatest, if I'm not mistaken. You'll correct me, I'm sure, if I'm wrong on that. And it's very interesting that Germany today strikes me as one of the more liberal, one of the more science-oriented and systematic in their approach to politics and economics and problem solving more generally. And here's someone who is artistically advancing, presumably, anyways, the thinking of a more romantic school of thought.
Yeah, and I think that's partly right with, at least with Till Lindemann and Rammstein. I think the other layer there is that, and what I find personally very compelling about Rammstein and Till Lindemann's solo stuff is that there seems to be a desire to hit at those maybe not anti-enlightenment, but this kind of layered sense of there's a darker side to everything. It's not rational. We have desires and drives, and there's a reason why, as much as everyone hates on Freud and like Lacan, like a Freudian or Lacanian reading of these songs and these works is quite compelling at times, precisely because there's these symptoms and these like desires that you don't want to express, and you want to repress. And on my post about it today, I think Zizek, he wrote a little bit about Rammstein, and he actually argues, he's like, it's not that they are making fascism ironic, it's they're putting all the darkness, they're
getting out the fascist energy. It's
all in your face, and so you realize this is much more boring than I thought it was.
I remember listening to Zizek describe meeting a bunch of his friends in Eastern Europe, and he said that they had a tradition where when they would meet each other, they'd sit down, and the first thing was like 10 minutes of just insulting each other, just like, I slept with your mother. Oh, my mother's dead. Well, I exhumed her corpse and had sex with her. Like your dead mother. It's like, oh yeah, I bet she probably enjoyed it too. Your dead cock is probably exactly what she's like. Just that level of just deep dark insult. And his point in telling the story, Zizek's point, because Zizek is very Freudian in his, as many modern Marxists are.
Lacanian and Hegelian.
The one thing I know about Lacan makes me, I hate him more than all of the other Freudians and Marxists. He's he's morally backwards. But
I will just say this: he's not worth your time to do an excessive deep dive. I think, unfortunately, he's important at some level to do a little bit of a reading of, like.
But the one thing I know about Lacan, I've written about elsewhere, is just horrible. But Freud, like, there might be some truth to it, and it's an interesting question because there's always on the one hand, there's this school of thought that holds that the things you do becomes habit. It's a very Heraclitean view, like day by day, the things you do become who you are, and there's this habit approach. And on the other hand, there's this belief that we have these essential drives. We have these natural impulses that you're born with that have nothing to do with habit. And if you don't express them, they will express themselves on their own terms in a way you can't control. If you repress it, like repression was the big Freudian term, if you repress it, they will come out in darker and worse ways.
Like,
and it's
you hold it all down, and then it's that whole like the cliche thing is like the dude, and it's why I, not to totally shit on all the manosphere people right now, but it's why you have people going off the deep end and being like, how could this happen? It's like, you have a bunch of dudes repressing parts of themselves. Of course, they have some dark secret and they're very public. Why are we shocked?
Oh yeah, whatever happened with Jack Murphy?
Oh yeah, I filmed some pornos and uploaded them.
Right, and it's I had it the first time I noticed this dichotomy. I assumed they were in some sense like mutually contradictory, and one of them had to be true and the other had to be false. And I know that habits work. I know that habits are a part of how we function. But increasingly, I've been of the opinion that maybe they're both true in different contexts, and that there does seem to be something to this drive. And I mean, the big virtue guy, Aristotle, famously argued that tragedy is a source of purging of emotion. And there's something almost Freudian about that, and it makes you wonder, does Rammstein and other bands that tap into that serve some kind of tragic purpose in the Aristotelian sense?
I would argue that actually Rammstein, so I'm borrowing this
mosh pits in particular.
So I'm borrowing this from a colleague of mine who, in a private conversation, her and I had talked about Rammstein for a while. We had a little bit of a falling out, but this was something interesting. She argued, and I think I agree with her, that Rammstein is the comedic end of the spectrum, and Till Lindemann's solo project is the tragic end of the spectrum. Because Rammstein, like we've talked about, it has a political edge. It has a little bit of humor. There's almost this joyous playfulness in it.
Oh yeah.
If you watch their live
they
shows,
don't take themselves too seriously.
Well, and they got controversy. Their one song, I forget which one it was. It's about the serial killer, gay cannibal, or whatever. The music video got so much hate because they didn't take it seriously enough. They were so kind of joking and jocular with it. But then you go and look at, and this is why I think I warn people, if they have weak stomachs and don't like perversion, particularly of a sexual sort, don't look at Till Lindemann's solo projects. Like, if you think Rammstein,
especially not the one on Pornhub, right?
I've watched that. It's not great. I made the mistake of watching that one, and I've now seen Till Lindemann's penis, and I don't know if I enjoy having that image in my head. But it's now ingrained in my head. But
he's really pushing that whole art versus porn question that's haunted American.
He's just saying, no, let's just make a judges. Porno. Well, actually, Rammstein did that. They made the video for Pussy, which is just hardcore porn, and it's been banned in a bunch of countries.
But didn't they make music specifically for it?
Yeah, they made a music, and then they made a porno with it, or something like that. It was some weird combo. But if you look at the songs titles, so from his first album, as a solo project, is an album with a song called Fish On, and the video is literally him riding a horse like a Mongolian steppe warrior, catching women who are naked and running, imprisoning them, and putting them on bikes and making them like pedal to provide electricity. And then his first album, everybody was shocked when his first album came out because it's called Skills and Pills. It's all in English, which is hilarious. He has a song about fat women and fucking them. He has a song about ladyboys, a song about golden showers, a song about going to the Yukon, a song called Praise Abort, where he says, I have 6 kids and I don't like them. Then the second album from 2019, his solo project, it gets even better. It's all in German, but it's even darker. He has a song about like a heroin overdose, a song about rubber fetishes, literally a song that riffs on a German modernist novel, and he basically narrates himself as a rapist. He has a song about gagging a woman. But there's a weird pain in all of the solo projects of like getting out all of his desires in a public way. It's kind of interesting.
So do you think the purpose of well, let me ask it as an open-ended question. What do you think is the purpose of artists? And this could be not even specifically to Rammstein, although I think Rammstein might have its own purposes here compared to other artists. But like, what's the artistic purpose in engaging with and expressing this kind of filth? Is it just is it this Freudian purgation thing for the audience, or is it just an expression of the Freudian purgation for the musicians, and the audience is just recipients of this filth? Or is everyone just indulging in degeneracy, or some blend of the three, or something else? Because I can easily imagine a lot of people believing, writing songs about gagging and raping women in golden showers and all this other this filth, this overt degeneracy is just letting go unenlightened hedonism. Do you think that's what's going on, or is there? Do you think they're actually engaging in something? This guy who reads Goethe and spends his time in like silence in some small country town away from the noise of the city in his free time, putting this stuff. I
genuinely don't think it's just hedonism for fun.
That's not my impression either.
Yeah. And my impression actually might be best summarized. I think was it film cinematographer for Hitchcock? I read the quote today. I was reading an interview with Jordan Peele for some reason, or a review of Jordan Peele's movie Nope, rather, and they quote this line. It's not Hitchcock, it's a different line, but it's a cinematographer who goes, he's like, I make two movies, one for them and one for me.
Okay.
And Rammstein to me often seems like that group kind of ritual. Obviously his solo project, he goes on tour, but it doesn't quite seem as personal. If you look at even the songwriting credits, everybody gets credited on it. So they all agree, and they've admitted they all agree on the songs. They all have to come to an agreement, or they just don't fucking make the album. I think that is almost a weird, like a public, but both of them are doing the same thing at some level. That is more, okay, admit you like this kind of stuff.
Okay.
Admit you enjoy this.
Sort of a Tool vicarious thing going. We all need it too, don't lie.
Yeah. And we all enjoy this. Don't lie to yourself. We all like big tits. We all wish we could raw dog. Like there's like, I think there's a certain level of that, but also a certain level of even their song on that the album that Deutschland is on, and Ausländer, so foreigner, even there, the lyrics, it's this kind of sentiment of I'm traveling and I feel like I'm lost. There's no coherence for me here. And there's almost this kind of expression of a similar human sentiment. The solo project to me almost seems at times as if Till is both telling stories. That happens a little bit in Rammstein. Some of the songs feel more like stories and kind of narrations, and also just expressing all of these desires and these flights of fantasy. He's allowing himself to enjoy these fantasies, even if he may have never actually engaged in them. And so there's a Freudian level of the talking here. By talking about it, by putting it out there, it's no longer yours. You're no longer bottling it up inside.
Right.
And there's almost a therapeutic element to saying, hey, that's what I'm into.
Okay. Or let's try this on and see if we're into it. Let's take this idea and develop it further in an act of creative exploration and see if it's something we would want. It feels like a lot of art, especially in novels, and it is that kind of exploratory development. And you see this in especially science fiction. And I mean like the old school good science fiction, like Gibson and Neil Stevenson and like the cyberpunk You see a little bit in Dune and things like that. Like, what is this? What here's an idea. Here's a development. Let's expand on this. Let's build on this. What does it look like without judgment? And sometimes that exploration takes you to beautiful places. Sometimes it takes you to very dark places, and sometimes it takes you to just really filthy places. And different artists do seem to have different proclivities in that direction. But
yeah, and I wonder, for me, at least when I listen to Rammstein and to Till Lindemann's solo stuff, and I actually have a slight preference for his solo project. I think it's more interesting. And I don't think it's mere hedonism. I don't think it's merely voyeurism of any kind. I think it's too literary to be that. It's too intentional. Everything has a place.
That's my impression too.
Even let's go back to Deutschland. Like, in the prior version of the German national anthem was this line, Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. And in Deutschland, the song, they turn it into Deutschland, Deutschland über Allin.
Can you explain the linguistic difference there for an English audience that doesn't speak German?
It kind of communicates. Über alles is kind of over everything, material and immaterial. Über Allin is over everyone, kind of. Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of a strange thing. But that's an intentional choice.
Right. You don't very clearly.
I think maybe an easy contrast for, if we mentioned punk, because I just watched a little video about G.G. Allin recently, is I don't ascribe too much intentionality to much of what G.G. Allin did.
Yeah, he doesn't have that vibe.
It seems like a very troubled soul who had to get something out, and so he just went batshit and did it, which is fine and might have a place and importance. But I think with Rammstein and even Till Lindemann in particular, I think it's hard to. I think it would be easy to psychoanalyze him if he were actually this type of partier that goes into Berlin to all these sex clubs.
I feel like you have to kill the death of the author theory, and with the death of the author, the personality of the person writing the song matters. And with G.G. Allin, you see just a maniac.
It's transparent. There's a certain transparency to G.G. Allin that I don't think Till Lindemann. Till Lindemann has as much.
Till Lindemann, from what I've read about his personal life, comes across as like almost something of a monk, like this very contemplative, private person.
Oh, he's extremely private and very introverted.
Yeah, and it gives
he's very horny by his own admission too. But he's very introverted. Well,
I'm sure the monks of the medieval ages were as well. But it's a very like, it throws a different light on the story that he's telling and on the art that he's creating, and that is for better or worse part of the art itself in a way.
Well, for me, I think one of my interests as well with Rammstein has been, since you and I kind of on Instagram follow similar circles and stuff, I follow all these like kind of Christian like bodybuilder bros, and everyone there is shitting on all. There's this hypercritical vigilance of sexual degeneracy. Let's shit all over everything, and rather than an honest kind of, no, you have desires. Yes. And I think what I find compelling with Rammstein and Till's solo project is, no, you have to face that something about that thing you find disgusting also appeals to you. There's a really, it's not famous, unfortunately. I'm going to steal the copy from the library, but I have a first edition German edition from 1968. There's an English translation that's kind of out of print, so you could probably find it used, called Smut and Anatomy of Filth. And one of the opening, it's these weird paragraphs. The author, though, functionally argues that the human body, when we remove, like purge things from our body, either vomit or fecal matter, we immediately are fascinated, but also repulsed.
Right. So there's something in in not just purging in the Aristotelian sense, but also in observing what has been purged that's artistically and perhaps psychologically and spiritually useful. Is that the argument?
I think that would be my argument. I think that, for example, if we were to do Till Lindemann's solo project, I think this idea, like the song Oxogan, or let's even just use the song Golden Shower, where he talks about golden showers. Why would you write that? And it's in English, so it's less poetic. But all these songs, there's this fascination with this side of the human psyche that says, why are we interested in this? Why do I want to put this on for size?
Even Deutschland kind of has that, and it does it very poetically. But the smut is not sexual. It's that domination theme. It's that
history,
that Uber sequence where he has all of these different Uber words in sequence. Uber, Hiblick, Überliegen, Uber. I don't remember all the rest of them, but
Überraschen, Überfallen.
All of them are
Übergeben.
Yeah, and Übermenschen gets mixed in there towards the end, and it's all of these this superiority and domination complex, which feels from a like hyper conservative high disgust reaction personality perspective very different from the smut, but from the Freudian and perhaps even more relevantly from a kind of Jungian shadow approach, it feels very similar in kind to the more sexual smut content.
100%.
And it's very direct in its confrontation of that. I mean, like the culmination is, I want to love you, but my love I cannot give you, because of that. And I don't know if that's, my German isn't good, if that's as explicit in the sexual smut stuff, or if they're just having fun, which is also something they do. Let's not beat around the bush. But it also has a little bit of that quality to it from my experience of it.
Well, and even the video, you have this red thread, this image of these red lasers going through history. And so you have all these images, the Hindenburg, you have the band members dressed up as various camp members surrounded by nuclear bombs being executed by Germania, represented by a black woman who is in an SS death with the SS uniform on.
And the cannibal priests.
The cannibal priests. You have you have references to the Rote Armee Fraktion, the Red Army faction, who are like a communist terrorist group, and that's referenced in the video as well. You have references to basically East Germany, and you have all these images that go together, and all throughout it, you have this. Like the first time I watched the video, I remember I was like, who's this black chick in this video? And then by the end you get, oh, okay, wait, she's representing Germania or Germania.
And it feels like a very progressive thing until you see some of the medieval depictions of Germania, and you're like, oh, they
and
kind of worked it in.
And that's the funny part, is that there's no purity. So part of it's like, yeah, you're a black German woman, great. That's representation progress, but you are also now you're part and parcel of the history
of all this other problem. Do you want to be part of it?
Like you're both, and it's not like you can't separate yourself from being the SS executor and being the person executed.
Yeah, it's the famous Christopher Hitchens critique of Hitler, was that he was, the greatest, harmed Germany more than anyone else. It's been harming itself for all these times. And I mean, to bring it home a little bit, another Hitchensism was the reflection on Jefferson's I tremble when I contemplate that God is just idea. Like all the rough parts of history are, often self-harm, and they're kind of hard to face. But as with smut, as with the dark parts of our sexuality and our inclinations toward violence, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't address them in art. In fact, it feels like it makes it even more important to address in art in some in some sense, at least some of the time.
So, well, and one thing that's interesting also on that album that might be helpful is that actually one of their other songs, which actually contrasts the idea of love and hate and what you love. And that's that whole song, Was ich liebe. And the whole, like, the second verse is, I don't love that I love something. I don't like when I like something. I'm not happy when I'm happy. And like, what I love will perish or die. What I love must also die. And so like this contrast of, can you love something and hate that you love it? Like, can you hate that you want to be attached to it? Can you hate that you want to love Germany but you can't condemn it because that's too easy, but you also just can't love it, and you hate that you love it.
Well, and he says that, I think, in the lyrics of Deutschland too.
Yeah.
Want to love you, want to hate you. At the same time, love and hate.
It's interesting as well because I think when you look at that album, actually, I just pulled up the track list because I think the track list is fascinating. I don't want to pull up their band page. I want to pull up the album. You have a song like Puppe, which is straight up just a story of a little girl sleeping as her sister works as like a sex worker in the next room and is getting banged in the next room to make money so they can live. And she's like holding, like she and the girl, it panics and it's from her perspective. And it's like, and then I rip the head of my little doll, its head off, because I'm not doing well, like this terror. And there's almost the whole album is kind of an exploration of like love and terror, maybe is the way I would put it.
I remember Chuck Palahniuk was describing his storytelling process to Joe Rogan and how he would test out ideas. And one of the stories he ended up telling was the story of a woman, because his process was sharing stories and seeing what resonated, if other people had stories that sort of matched, and he knew he'd got something if other people had different versions of that story that they wanted to share after he shared it. And I guess some woman told him a story, or maybe he ended up writing this after a woman shared a story, but it was of a girl who was repeatedly sexually abused by her grandfather. And one day she was out walking on the trail and she found a small chick, a baby bird that had fallen from her nest, and it had broken its leg and was in pain, and she wanted to put it out of its misery. And so she picked it up and wrung its neck. And as she wrung its neck, the bird spasmed and tried to get out to survive, but she held on tight as she wrung its neck and killed it. And in that moment that it died, it reminded her exactly of what it was like to what her grandfather made her do for him. And it's just like, what a fucking gut punch of a story.
Yeah,
like what a fucking brutal story. But like, that is not just smut. That is not just indulging in hedonism. That is some, it's not just darkness for darkness sake either. It's like Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita. It's forcing you to confront something dark as almost an exercise in moral education. You're learning something about what evil truly is in that exercise. And I'm not saying that like Rammstein songs are that in every case. But it's hard to look at Till Lindemann's stuff about big tits and say, oh, he's expressing the appearance of evil in this world or temptation. It's like, no, I think he just likes tits. But
I'm not convinced he's just anything other than a fan of tits.
Right. Who isn't? But
it's the new masculine anthem for 2023.
But it does. Some of his songs do seem to do that, though.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's no different than, I think Lolita is a good reference. I think any good novel that forces I think of like James Lee Burke and stuff, and some of his Dave Robichaux crime novels that are really just beautifully written explorations of kind of southern Louisiana violence and horror and trauma. But I think
I've argued for a few years now that Hannibal Lecter, the character, as well as Clarice Starling, are representations of that kind of Southern culture, of the cruel and in some ways barbaric, but also noble qualities of the aristocratic South. That is cruelty. That is hated by the Northern polite society, but there is a kind of nobility to it.
I think that's probably right, and I think there's. I don't think it's just like you said, though. I think you're right that I don't know if it's. I don't think it's merely hedonism or the entertainment value of the let's just like shock you. I think there's maybe a little bit of that, but there has to be some of these songs might just be a little bit of that, but some of the songs seem so intentionally written and so carefully crafted that there seems to be an intention to say like, hey, maybe there's more.
So how would you go about identifying that kind of care and craft in a song like that? How would you distinguish between a song that is just hedonism versus a song that addresses hedonism but isn't just hedonism? Whether that's sexuality or violence or what have you.
So I think this is interesting. That's a really good question, actually, because I think it's too easy for English speakers. I'm going to just shit on English speakers here, people who don't at least try to learn another language.
Don't shit too hard. English is a beautiful language. It is
a beautiful language, but I'm going to shit on the tendency to not want to learn another language. So it's
what you probably don't know. What's the old phrase? Who knows of England who only England knows, right?
Exactly.
Hard to know much of English without learning some German or Japanese in my case, or Greek or.
So I'm thinking of your stuff on Homer, like you were speaking some Greek, and like I think you've indicated that you either are learning or have learned some Greek and have an intention to at least try to make that effort.
I know a couple dozen words. I have aspirations to learn the full language. Unfortunately, the version I want to learn doesn't exist and was never written, or was never spoken. It was written, but it was never spoken.
Yeah, that's tragic.
It's hard.
But I think one like for Rammstein or even Till Lindemann solo project, the easiest way would be you have to kind of just know German. You can't just go off the sound. You can't just go off of the videos. You can kind of guess from the videos, but the videos don't tell you much, unless like Deutschland does. But like the song High Fish, which is a shark, it's literally about a shark in a funeral. Unless you know German literature, you don't realize that they basically steal from Brecht and just move a few words around.
Interesting.
And change some of the lyrics, but they steal straight from Brecht. Or the song Dalai Lama, unless you Googled it, you don't realize that they just rewrote Erlkönig, the Goethe poem.
Which is extremely famous. Is that made its way into American literature by way of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Excellent novel for those who haven't read it.
But yeah, and so I think you have to know the language for one. You don't need to be fluent, but I think some level to read the lyrics is important. So I'll just use the example of the song Ach so gern from his solo project. The refrain is straight up, then I like kissing women, but not always on the mouth. I wanted to know what it's like and kissed until my lips were wounded. And then at one point it's like,
it's a very strange word choice.
Well, he loves everything. He's obsessed. He sinks in, and he has a line, I sinked into a mare, like a sea of libido. And then again, I kissed them, not always on the mouth. I kissed until my lips were kind of wounded or whatever. I took these women in my arms, and a lot of them just silently whispered no, and he had no shame and went through with it. And so and then goes further and further with like crying and anger and fear, and talks about how he basically in the video is Till dressed up as like this dandy, this like lecherous dandy. But if you listen to it and it's not as explicit, but there's moments where you're like, this reminds you of the rapist in Berlin Alexanderplatz. Gets out of prison and he rapes women. There's hints of that, like the way this kind of narcissism.
Yeah, that almost feels like a Nabokov move, because that's for those of you who are listening to this who aren't aware. Nabokov's Lolita is a book about a pedophile, and it's not just that the protagonist anti-hero is a pedophile. He's also the narrator, and he's narrating in the second person. He's narrating to the reader directly, and it's extremely creepy because he's actually very persuasive. It's one of the most brilliantly written books in the English language, which says a lot coming from someone for whom English isn't their first language. And he's persuasive until he'll go too far, and from Nabokov, not Humbert's perspective, goes too far intentionally, and he just loves her, and it portrays pedophilia as a form of love, which is a kind of reductio ad absurdum. It's sort of an explanation that like love is not some all absolving excuse, because it depicts the horror of it very clearly. Martin Amis, who I opened this with, once famously said that Nabokov was a moral genius, and I'm inclined to agree with him. I think he's correct in that, but you can't get to those to the heart of some of these issues, to some of these moral questions, without going to some extremely dark places at times.
Yeah, and I think the key for recognizing that distinction is, okay, yeah, there might be like some crass moments in Rammstein or even Till Lindemann's solo stuff, but if you look at some of the songs, how is it structured? Even if you don't know the language, like with Deutschland, you can kind of tell there's a pattern, there's repetitions. You can hear an intentionality there that kind of precludes a certain, I'm just going to get on stage and be like Gigi Allen, scream into a microphone, shit myself, and beat people up. I think there's a level of, even in the tone that Till Lindemann takes, there's another song on his solo album about a mom overdosing, and you don't know until the very end. Like, it's talking about how like it's a beautiful day and we could do so much, and the sun's out, or take me, and then the chorus is like, stand up, please stand up, and then it's again, the circus is in town, please show me all the animals, get me a little like an ice cream lemonade, and then you don't get to the very bridge, and it's like, why do I always have to wait? Why do I always have to cry? Why are all the black holes in your arms and legs? And then it's, mom, stand up, stand back up. And you don't know until the very end, with the screaming and the pain, that that's what it's about.
Oh,
but it's dark. But it's one of those things where it's like,
but that's so well planned. It's so well planned, and someone just expressing themselves couldn't possibly plan that.
Yeah, it's similar. I can't remember the guy. Who was the guy who killed himself? The Chris Cornell. Like some of Chris Cornell's music, you listen to it and there's so much hurt there, but it's not this voyeuristic, I'm looking at my dark side and enjoying and reveling. It's
Kurt Cobain as well, I would say. Yeah.
You're not just staring at the dark and then reveling in, oh, it's so gleeful to be smutty and filthy and like degenerate. There's actual, and that's why I would say Rammstein's kind of comedic, which doesn't mean that there isn't like I think every comedic thing has a dark side to it that hurts, and like a trauma or a core of pain. But I think the Lindemann project hints at like Till Lindemann's loneliness. Like there's a deep loneliness where you get to play in these narrations, but they all express a certain pain and this deep emotion of loss and hurt. And I think that even if you don't know the language, knowing the language helps to recognize maybe some of the poetic structures, get the literary references. But I think you can hear a certain like expression.
It's like a sound. Just the sound itself conveys. Like good poetry does that. Good poetry and good music conveys its emotion purely in the sound, and the lyrics can add to that, certainly.
It's why, like, yeah, we're certain like expressionist kind of poems or whatever, and kind of surreal poems. I don't know how familiar you are with the American poet Frank Stanford.
I'm not familiar.
You should look him up. Everybody should. He's great. He writes these weird poems, but the lines and the rhythms and the way he constructs things and the images all coalesce together to create a total effect. And so I think that's maybe the way I would distinguish crass enjoyment versus intentionality, is what is the total effect? How do the parts in the totality add up? Or is it just
chaos?
Or is it just Cardi B talking about a wet ass pussy? Like,
yeah.
Like, I'm not denying that Cardi B probably has some level of talent. I don't think you get to be somewhat successful without some level of like talent behind you or around you. But
sure, yeah,
I would not say that there's a substance there of an intentionality other than I want to make a very crass pseudo-feminist anthem about vaginas being wet and assholes being wet, I guess. Like, that to me is the parts and the whole don't add up.
Yeah.
Which is maybe a weirdly, I guess that's kind of loosely Aristotelian at some level.
Well, I mean, like the function of the purging of pathos fits into a broader purpose of a good citizen and of a virtuous person, and that purgation of emotion is part of the plan of being a good person. Whereas and I think, and I mean, I'm not as well versed in Rammstein's discography and Till Lindemann's discography as you are, but from the songs I've seen from them, that it's at least that broader schema is visible. Now, I suppose, to be honest, you have to ask yourself if you're spotting patterns in clouds or not. Because I'm sure a sufficiently skillful linguist, a cunning linguist, as it were, could craft some broader narrative about how Cardi B like taps into this as well, and in fact, contemplating the mysteries of the wet ass pussy, exposes our misogynist yet feminine worshiping pathology of patriarchal Western culture or what have you. You with enough linguistic skill, and the more I study philosophy, the more suspicious I get of many philosophical arguments, because you begin to see the pattern of sufficient linguistic skill becomes
it's sophistry.
Almost all excusing in a way.
Yeah, it's sophistry. It goes back to Plato. It's just Plato critiquing the sophists again, saying, hey, like, you just use it to advance your ideological bent or your politics or your
personal interests. Yeah.
And well, I think what you just said is key, but I think there's a way to kind of hedge against that a little bit. It's okay, point it to me in the text.
Yeah.
Can you justify that in the text? Is it shouting wop, wop, wop over and over again? Is that actually doing anything? Is there actual like rhythm, rhyme, pattern? Does that add up to something? Is there some hint in the text? And it's a little harder with music, but even literature, people are like, well, this matters. This is such a great book. Like, no, it might not be.
Well, and here for me, the death of the author becomes valuable as well. When you look at someone like Cardi B, who seems to be I know literally nothing about her, but
she's a former stripper who made a song called Wet Ass Pussy. That's all.
Yeah, my distant knowledge of her is that she seems to be owned and produced and in it for the publicity and money, contrasted with someone like Till Lindemann, who is very much, or as mentioned before, someone like Chris Cornell, who was to my knowledge, a practicing Orthodox Christian, or someone like, Kurt Cobain, the author of "Rape Me," the song, speaking of smut and same sort of content. in a way that Till Lindemann is talking about. Anyone who listens to "Rape Me" by Nirvana is not going to walk away thinking, well, Kurt Cobain was asking for it. He was really supporting rape in this way. He just look at how he was dressed or what have you.
Exactly.
It's very much, there's a lot more obviously going on. Not that I'm not gonna say that "Rape Me" was a particularly morally deep song,
but there's a little bit, there's something there,
but it's not. But it is a moral song. It's a moral song about dark matter.
Perhaps that even, so this goes back to actually one thing you said earlier in the conversation, which I thought was insightful, was with your experience with like truckers and working class people who have this nostalgia for their neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
I think you see that in artists like Kendrick Lamar. I'm not always, like, I've never been the biggest hip hop connoisseur. I appreciate some of it, but I can listen to Kendrick Lamar, and I'm a white dude from the suburbs. I have never been to Compton. Don't really feel like I should probably go to Compton. Don't have.
See a little bit in Eminem and in and that's this same
this almost non-judgmental approach to their desires, to their past.
Yeah. Oh, you see it in Tupac too. This contradictory. I love it, but it's awful. It's killing people. It's terrible, and yet I'm a product of it at the same time.
And I think maybe that's the interesting thing, is that you can approach your past, national, regional, personal, or even your desires at some level. And maybe that's what Rammstein and the solo project have in common, is do it in a way that is not jumping to the critical moment, the criticism and the critique. Instead, no, lay in the contradictions, swim in that kind of balance of, no, there is this weird density of identities that coalesce.
Yeah.
When I think about Germany.
Yeah. And beyond the regional and the national, just as a human, we swim in this contradictory blend of the transcendent and the yearning for the pure and the beautiful and the true and the idealistic. And at the same time, we love big tits, and we just love like we have these baser impulses, and we are both. And we are not one or the other, and the two are, in a sense, not even contradictory. Where we are complicated and contradictory, and both of these and all of the above, and we just have to figure out how to embrace that and live with it.
Yeah, and I think that probably is at some level, like, and I think for me at least, art and pop culture and music is a better tool for that at some level than philosophy, to be quite frank. I think, well,
it's my philosophical opinion after the better part of 15 years of studying philosophy, that at the end of the day, art is I don't want to say superior to philosophy, because my final position is that philosophy is its own kind of art.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, like, yes, art, you can say that at the end of the day, it all comes down to art.
Well, there's a reason. For example, my mentor from undergrad, I was a philosophy major in undergrad, and my mentor is now the editor of a Christian literature and arts journal, because he thinks that matters, and that's an important part of human experience that conveys something that philosophy, which has its own art, because I think you're right there, doesn't convey.
Yeah.
And I think for me, pop culture matters precisely because everybody listens to it. Not everyone's going to go read Lolita. Not everyone's going to go read Heidegger. I hope they do. It'd be dope. Or like Plato at length.
Plato,
a ton of people listen to Rammstein.
The great thing about Plato is he really brings art to philosophy in his dialogues. This is the big Nietzschean point, is that he merged Greek tragedy. He Aufhebend tragedy. He rejected tragedy while embracing tragedy into philosophy.
But no one gives a, like, I'm gonna be blunt, no one, as much as I like reading like Peter Van Inwagen, no one's really get it, unless you're a specific type of nerd, gets excited about it. Is the table my laptop on a table, or is it particles or inch table wise? But right. Rammstein still sells out stadiums, so that seems like maybe we should actually look at that, because so this goes back to the story I was telling you off air. Actually, it comes full circle. I can kind of tell this now. I was drunk in this stupid little Baltic bar, very, very inebriated. I think we 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And then I had to drive like 8 hours with my aunt in a car, hungover, drunk, not having slept. It was not good. But I remember this like 17-year-old dude at the bar telling me that when I mentioned it, I thought Rammstein had some really cool lyrics and ideas. He goes, "Oh yeah." And I had a conversation with like the 3 or 4 people that were there, just average working class German dudes, at length about German history, memory, identity. And I thought, okay, all of my academic friends in German studies are like, oh, they're kind of interesting, but they're kind of crass and it's pop culture. Fuck them. I was like, except I had a great conversation. They all like Rammstein. That tells me something's interesting, that those guys like it and find depth and meaning and intrigue in it. And
Yeah.
that to me was a kind of a, maybe pop culture kind of does matter, and it's not just high literature.
You know who was also pretty crass in his time was Shakespeare.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Oh,
how the times change with what's high culture and what's low culture.
I think 2023 we should just make Shakespeare very perverse again.
Well, I mean, if you understand the original, you don't need to make him perverse. It's right there in the time.
Or I think your next series of things you write on should be on Aristophanes and just,
oh God, the clouds, the frogs.
They're turning the freaking frogs gay.
Yeah.
No, reclaim Aristophanes from the feminists.
Oh God, I'm having to struggle hard enough to reclaim Homer from the feminists. The last, not the last podcast, the podcast before was about
I saw that. I haven't listened to that yet.
Yeah, the basic premise is that a certain Madeline Miller wrote a novel about how Achilles and Patroclus were gay, and this just took off in the culture. I've been told by someone that apparently there was some scholarship that was speculating about that in the past. There's no textual basis for this. There's zero textual basis for that theory of homosexuality within Homer or within any contemporary sources at the time. And this is at a time when Plato was arguing that the ideal army would be an army of homosexual men, of pairs of homosexual men, because they would have loyalty and they would have courage to not let their lover be shamed by their conduct. And
I think the church took that the really wrong way and ran with it.
Yeah, and like no one was more famous in Plato's time than Homer. Like if the theory of Achilles and Patroclus being gay lovers were true, you would see that mentioned in Plato. Yeah. It would be right there, and it's not. It's this feminist, taking the art and trying to employ it to their own purpose. And Madeline Miller subsequently wrote another novel, even more famous, apparently, Circe, which is a feminist take on the Odyssey.
Yeah, I think I've heard of that novel. I'm intrigued by. Yeah, I don't know. But I'm intrigued by darkness. I can't say, like, I'd be lying. Like, my dissertation, the novels I'm writing on are all about violence and degenerate shit.
Yeah. Well, and the Iliad is interesting in particular, not to deviate too far from Rammstein, but my favorite book about, and not to repeat previous content from previous podcasts, but I'm gonna add some new stuff. My favorite writer on Homeric epic is a guy named Greg Nodge. He's a Harvard philologist. You never see philologists anymore these days.
It's tragic. I agree with you on that. It is actually sad.
But what he identified in the Iliad was that when Achilles is fighting Hector in his rage, there's actually an element of cannibalism enters the story. Achilles actually threatens and intends to eat Hector. He's that upset. He's that angry. Hector, like as Hector and Achilles have run like 7 times, 10 times around the walls of Troy. It's this kind of ridiculous scene, actually. And finally, Hector has to turn around and face him, and he says, "Okay, we're gonna fight. You're probably gonna kill me. Let's make a pact that would give each other good, proper funerals. Whoever wins." And Achilles gives his famous speech, which Troy actually was for once fairly you know correct about, which is there are no pacts between lions and men. Wolves and lambs can never come to agreements but hate each other out and through. Therefore there can be no peace between you and I till one of us falls. And then Achilles says, I'm going to devour you. I'm going to, I don't remember the exact line, but Greg Nosh points out this actual cannibalism enters the scene in a moment.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And the Iliad, the greatest epic in the entire Western canon, I argue that there's actually the origins of the biblical concept of immortality through the word that we see in the Bible comes not from the Jewish tradition, but actually from the Greek tradition, from the Iliad, from the concept of heroic idealism and immortalization through song that we see in the Iliad. And here's this, the heart of Western literature is not just addressing menace, this taboo concept that invokes the divine sanction against violations of divine order, but also cannibalism. And the Iliad, for those of you who haven't read it, most of the book is just line by line account of people getting butchered in a fucking brutal fashion. Like there'll be passages where it'll be like, and so was a blacksmith in the town of such and such, and he fashioned fine crafted chariot harnesses, and everyone knew him in this town, and he was just married to this bride, but he never got to consummate his marriage before he had to go out to Troy, and he still owed several cows to the bride's father. And anyways, here he was in battle, and then Hector comes out, or Agamemnon comes out and crushes his hip with a boulder, and he screams in pain as he collapses to the ground, and then Agamemnon stabs a spear through his face, and his eyes like shuttered close, and his armor clashed around him, and no one in his hometown would know his beautiful works again, and his wife at home unconsummated would forever mourn his loss. And then bam, next story, same thing. It's a repetition of micro story after micro story of this, the horror of war. Just this absolutely viscerally depicted horror of war, describing people having the spears through their crotch and screaming as they fall, and their armor clanged about them, is this description you hear over and over again, and right alongside the glory of war, right alongside the heroism and the courage in war. And it's not either or, it's the both and. It's the both and. It's the horribleness and the virtue. And it seems like Homer is a pinnacle in its own right. But it's cool to see the encapsulation of that kind of juxtaposition of opposites, of apparent contradictions embodied in artwork. And it's cool to see that in artists. It's very common to hear people talk about how art, music today isn't like it used to be. It used to be so much better in my day, which we also see precedent in the Iliad of, people 2,800 years ago, people talking about, oh, you warriors, Achilles, you weren't nearly as good as the soldiers in my day. Like,
the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Exactly. But then you have people like Rammstein that seem to, not to compare Rammstein to Homer. No,
they're the exact same. They're at the same level.
now we're getting crass. Who seem to be able to capture that in a way that
is both playful but also respectful of kind of the evils of human life.
Yeah, acknowledge it.
Yeah, like acknowledge, and also a certain respect for it, where it's not just an anonymous figure getting murdered. It's that guy had cows and he had a wife, and yet he gets brutally murdered. And there's an aesthetic pleasure in hearing about his brutal death. Yeah.
But there's a kind of objectivity to it where we we see it passively, and we can empathize with it, or we can glory in the triumph over him. But we can also transcend above both of those into this kind of objective view of both at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in that transcendence that art seems to become possible. I've recently become very interested in James Joyce, another artist who at times would bask in the vulgar and the crass.
More often than at times.
Yeah. And it was that but the exploration of the crass and the filth was for Joyce as well a kind of exercise in achieving that artistic distance, that objective view that gives art its authority and its clarity of vision and scope and for lack of a better description, a kind of feeling of transcendence even.
Yeah, and I think there's a further layer, because you brought up Joyce. I think in modernist literature, and I'll stick to the German tradition, the modernist tradition in German literature is extremely violent, profoundly violent, in a way that a lot of modernist literature, including Joyce, is just not.
No, Joyce is not very violent.
But it's interesting, and one of my mentors here in my program, he's on my committee, his first book was about this, and violence and modernism. And it's a really good book, but he goes, all these theories of violence still just look away from the act of violence itself, the actual moment. And I think that is maybe where there's a certain comfort people take when, oh yeah, we know these horrible things exist out there, but let's look away from that horrible moment, the actual moment of death, the actual moment of destruction or ruin or degradation. And his argument is, no, you have to actually look at the specific act, the material act. So like in Kafka, when he tells this little story of stabbing a rat, people are like, well, he brings the rat to eye level, so humans and animals are not different. And my mentor here is like, no, like he stabbed the rat. Why are we ignoring the fact that the narrator stabbed and did a violent act? Like that's kind of important in this.
Right.
You can't just erase the fact that he killed this rat and then brings it to eye level. And so I wonder also, like we talk again, we're not putting Homer and Rammstein on the same level, but I wonder if there's not that similar level of Homer, like all these micro stories is an attempt to not look away from the violence, to not just say in the abstract, okay, hey, he was killed in battle. You could say he was killed in battle and he had cows and it's tragic. But no, he had his hip broken and then a sword was stabbed through his face. That's a very graphic confrontation with that. And maybe there is no pedagogical purpose for it, but
head on. Yeah. Well, it's a this is us moment. It's a this is what it means to be human and to live, and this is you and I as well. And there's a brilliant moment in Greg Nage's book where he's describing the works and days of Hesiod, and he's describing the generations of men, the golden generation, the silver generation, the iron generation, the bronze generation, and the nameless generation. And there's a cycle to this, which we see variations of in modern times as well, the Strauss-Howe theory of generational cycles and things like this. But what Greg Nage points out is that the personalities of these reflect the positive and negative aspects of cult heroes, and their the cults themselves. It reflects the positive and negative aspects of humanity in every generation. These are all of us, you know. It's not like we're getting worse or we're getting better. It's these are the aspects of all of us all the time. And bringing that to attention and forcing us to face that in some sense gives us like more of a choice in a way.
Yeah, no, I think that, yeah, I think that's right. And I think maybe if we bring it back less to like the to Rammstein, so it's a little bit maybe less noble, perhaps, slightly less noble. You have that kind of, you have the national, the regional, you have the literary, you have all these layers of the past and the present going back and forth and kind of messing inside of it. And I wonder, and I kind of think actually that there's probably some level of, no, that is you too. Like you said, it's not like you and I are not exempt from, we might not have the specific type of fetishes or anxieties that Till Lindemann has. And that would be
Hopefully
weird
not.
if we would confess them on a podcast, which we won't. But everyone says, well, no, I'm not like that. Well, no, you have weird shit in your past. You have weird things you like to do. You have things you take pleasure in that you maybe realize are not worthy of taking pleasure in.
Yeah.
And you can either repress it and deny it and act and flagellate yourself, and or you can kind of speak it out, which is not to say you should go out, like if your passion is shouting slurs at strangers in the parking lot, you maybe shouldn't do that for your own safety. But at least confronting that is probably a good idea.
You can be like Zizek and find a close group of friends that you can do that with.
Exactly. Well, exactly. And I think weirdly, that is maybe where there's that similarity. You have a
find that catharsis.
Exactly. And maybe it's not therapeutic, but you at least get to not have to hold it all in or repress it. And I think that's weirdly maybe the Homeric thing as well. And for the reader or the listener, because Homer obviously was not read and 2,800 years ago, it was heard. I'm wondering if there's not a similar experience where you listen to it and you're like, I don't like this, but I can't look away and I can't stop listening.
Yeah.
Like I'm repulsed and I find this really offensive and gross, but I'm enjoying it too. Why am I enjoying it?
It's the train wreck thing. Yeah. It reminds me of what, like
Homeric
I mentioned
train
before.
wreck.
Yeah. Well, and that's the story of the Iliad. It's Satan got us the ruinous wrath of Achilles that's incurred countless sufferings and sent innumerable souls untimely to hell. It's this story of disaster. It's a story of unnecessary suffering and trauma and death and pain, and that's what draws us in some ways. But there's this kind of salvation offered on the other end. There's a kind of there is a positive on the other side of going through the darkness. And I mean, I know we were talking a lot earlier about Freud and Lacan and the Freudian school of repression and so forth. But
you're going to get all the hatred from all the right wingers for talking about the Jews and the Jewish psychoanalysts.
Well, I mean, I think Jung's idea of like, facing the shadow side of these emotions, there's you can say it's not scientific, which is probably true, but it does feel like there's a grain of truth to it, or maybe of wisdom to that approach. And the wisdom precedes Freud and Jung.
Yes.
And Lacan. Yes. It goes all the way back to the Bronze Age,
well,
as it were.
I guess maybe this is the important thing for Freud, and as a reference, is everyone gets hung up on all the particularities, but they miss that Freud himself tells stories. He tells stories about his patients. He makes references to literature and to music.
Which is why scientists don't like him.
Yeah, well, fuck science. Science is stupid.
We'll have to do another podcast on that at some point.
Yeah, I'm down. But I think that that's important, that he narrates what his patients went through. And so it absolutely precedes Freud. I just think Freud formalized it.
Yeah. And he wrote, he expressed this view in a kind of scientific, or depending on your view, pseudoscientific language
manner. Yeah, exactly.
Which artists like Till Lindemann don't even bother to do. It's like, we're going to stay with the art. We're not going to do philosophy or pseudo philosophy. We're not going to do science or pseudoscience. We're just going to stay with the art, stay with the storytelling, stay with the music and the rhythm and the sound of the dark side of human nature, and have faith that that is some kind of path forward. That's some kind of as dark as it is, a step in a positive and better direction.
Well, so ironically, we talked about Zizek. The quote from Zizek that I posted in my post on Instagram today was that Rammstein undermines the system not through some critical utopian vision, but through the more obscene brutality of the immersion it enacts. Which I like.
Exposes, yeah.
Like it immerses you in it. You're in it. You get to go into the brutality of all the fascist aesthetics. You get to go into the brutality of all the smut and the grossness. And there is no critical utopian paradise on the other side. But now you get to realize it's not as scary. It's not as bad. And maybe it's more pathetic than you thought it was.
Yeah. It weakens
it.
Demystifies.
Exactly. And I think maybe that's also the Homeric thing as well. Like the listing, it's demystifying the abstract glorification of violence, the all too easy glorification of warrior culture and slaughter.
Yeah. Well, the Iliad is interesting because it does both. It really illustrates the brutality and the what's the famous poem, Dulce et decorum est. You would not say so, boldly, how wonderful and glorious it is to die for your country. Dulce et decorum. Oh, the Latin is escaping me. I've had too many beers. Dulce et decorum est pro patria morti. It's the line. Haunting poem. Very much the opposite of Charge of the Light Brigade, for example. And the Iliad does that, but at the same time, it does express a glory in battle, and the two feed into each other. The opening lines. I won't do it in Greek to spare people, but it says, these stout souls became feasts for the birds and dogs. Like, what a fate! But the fact of that adds something to the choice to participate in it. It makes the line from Troy where Brad Pitt says, the gods envy us because we are immortal. Everything we do is more beautiful. It doesn't, that's not in Homer. That's not in the Iliad, but it does capture something Homeric. It does. I thought it was a brilliant addition. I thought it was a really genius line by whoever produced or directed that film, because it is a both and the real demystification of heroic idealism happens in the Odyssey. But that's I think a conversation for another time. We are coming up on or like an hour and
45 minutes.
45 minutes. Oh God, this is the longer one.
You said ramble, so I ran.
We did ramble. We absolutely rambled. But I'm sure people will enjoy it. It's for a subject like art and smut and the dark side of human nature. There's so much to say and so much to go over, and
I'm happy to come on and talk more about it. That's literally all my dissertation's kind of about it, from a little anxiety and politics as well, but whatever.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it expresses itself in politics. But I think
just a quick one final little example. The second novel in the post-war trilogy I'm writing about is about the new Bonn Republic in the early 1950s in West Germany. And the main character is a self-avowed pedophile who's also a socialist trying to stop nuclear rearmament. And it starts with him coming back from the funeral of his underage wife, and it concludes with him raping an underage girl and having visions of armies of Nazis and the German soldiers of the past marching and leading into the pits of hell. And then he kills himself in a direct reference to Kafka, but without the literary joy of Kafka's suicide.
Wow. That's
It's dark as
layers.
hell.
That's layers upon layers of dark there.
And then there's 2 other novels on both sides of that the author wrote that I'm working with. So
that's genius. It somehow manages to blend reality with paranoia, like just from your summary.
The reality part is terrifying, because if you read that particular novel, it's been translated by a guy named Michael Hoffman. The Hot House is the English translation. It's for those who might be interested in reading post-war German literature, it's very, you can easily link various real life politicians to particular characters from the time.
No real life politicians are involved in pedophilia.
It's not like
do
Jeffrey
away
Epstein
with
didn't
that
do anything wrong.
disinformation.
Innocent. Free Ghislaine and let her live a happy life as a MILF.
Yes.
Yeah, no, but I'm happy to come on and talk about whatever again. It's fun.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure we will. It's been a fun discussion. Are there any particular places, Instagram channels or websites or blogs where people can follow your stuff on Rammstein and German anxiety? And
you can follow me at the Hinterland. It's on Instagram. I think I have 2 underscores, whatever those are called, in between the and Hinterland.
We'll throw it in the description here. Yeah,
or you can also just go find the podcast page and they'll figure it out there. But other than that, no, I'm gonna start a blog. I think that is the plan. I've been postponing that, but
excellent.
I'm on fellowship all of next year, so I get paid to sit on my ass and read and write for a year.
Well, excellent. Well, it's good to hear, and it's such a fun subject to talk about, art and the dark side of human nature, and where those two coincide in a more positive direction. Hopefully.
And you need to go listen to more of his solo project. I'm not going to encourage you to go look up the porno. Don't look up the porno. Skip that part. That's not worth it. It was not worth the experience.
I'll say that I won't.
But his solo project is pretty cool and fascinating.
Excellent. Well, good to know, and I hope any listeners to this take that as an injunction to listen to Rammstein and Till Lindemann stuff as well. So, yes. Thanks so much, Jonas, for coming on, and
thanks for having me.
Talk more later.
Sounds good.